Welcome to my video on the concept of trapping in the step method. As part of finding the best move, we first perform an orientation and then start looking at technical themes that are related to it. And as part of the orientation, we look at vulnerable pieces, pieces that are unprotected, pieces that are valuable and can be chased, and pieces with limited mobility. And often when you spend some time on orientation, you will identify them, and then you can start figuring out how to trap them. So this is the process. Identify the vulnerable piece. So pieces that have only a few squares that they can move to, pieces that are undefended, pieces that are one time defended by a piece and one time under attack by another piece. Then identify all the current escape squares of the target piece. Find moves that attack the target and take away all the escape squares. And then you verify your candidate move. So sometimes by moving the attacker, you create new escape squares, and then the target can move there. So that's an important thing to check. And of course, sometimes there is a defense like a counterattack that you also have to take into consideration. And then execute trap the piece. So I'll switch now to chess base. So in this position, take a moment, identify the vulnerable piece on the black side. White is the move. You can see that by looking at the white dot next to the square H1. And it will not come as a surprise that the queen is the target. What are the escape squares of the queen in the current position? There are none. F4 is covered by the queen, F5 is covered by the knight on G3. G5 is covered by the pawn on H4 and the knight, and E4 and is covered by the rook and the knight, and so the queen has no squares to go to at the moment, so we just have to attack it. And of course an obvious way to do that would be knight H2, to move the knight there, but then we have to do our verification step. And we see that after knight H2, the queen can take on H4, and after knight F3, the queen escapes, so we lost the opportunity. So knight H2 doesn't work, we have to find a better solution. And the better solution in this case is rook E4. And you would say, okay, we are investing in an exchange, but then we trap the queen and we're up in material. So a simple illustration of the process. In this position, we have to identify the vulnerable piece. Can you see it? The vulnerable piece in this position is the knight on A5. It is one time defended by the queen on C7 and one time under attack by the queen on C3. So the power balance of let's say the attack and defense on this knight is 0, as if it was an undefended piece. And we just have to add an attacker and create a twofold attack. And with the move bishop d2, we win the piece because it is already trapped, but we just have to add an attacker. And for many beginning players, seeing that a piece that is one time defended and one time under attack can be as vulnerable as an undefended piece is something that they might overlook. Okay, so in this case, let's identify the vulnerable piece. It is the knight on C3, And there are three ways to attack it. We can play rook e to c1, rook a to c1, and rook e3. And only one is the right way of trapping the knight. So we can play a rook to c1, a rook to c1, or a rook to e3. And after rook c1, there's knight e2, so there's an escape square. And after rook c1, the knight goes to a2. And now we are too late, and the knight escapes. So the only correct way of trapping the piece is rook e3. Straightforward examples of the process. So in step 4, as we explained, we go from 3 to 5 ply, half moves, and we have to prepare the combination before it can occur. These preparatory moves we identified were luring, chasing, targeting, clearing, and elimination of defense. And then elimination of defense, we had the acronym BLIC, blocking, luring away, because we're luring away the defender, interfering, chasing away, and capturing. So let's see what's going on here. What would be the target, the vulnerable piece? We identify that the queen on d5 is a vulnerable piece. What are the escape squares in the current position of this queen? We identify that these are the escape squares of the queen. So one of the things which is very helpful, if you visualize it like this, it gives you a hint which piece might be useful in trapping this queen. We need a piece that can cover a2, b3, and d5. And then, because they're all in one diagonal, the piece that comes in mind, of course, is the bishop. So by highlighting the escape squares and the target square where the current piece is, you get a hint for which piece might work. But if we play bishop c4 immediately, we create a new escape square, and the queen can go to a5. So bishop c4 takes away all the squares, attacks the target, but queen a5, and then the queen escapes. And if we would try to chase it with rook c5, we can see that the queen can go to a2 or b3. So we have to find a way, prepare the combination by taking queen a5 as a defense away. And which piece made queen a5 possible? Because there was a queen on d2 attacking the queen on a5, but it was defended by the knight on c6. So we take the knight, black takes back, and now we play our move, and we have taken away the defense queen a5, because the queen is no longer supported by the knight. So this was elimination of defense as a preparatory move. Let's go to this one. And here it takes a little bit more imagination. This is as a preparatory move. Rook takes e5, so we lure the queen to e5. And here we see the target and the escape squares. And again, we see that the current escape squares are d6, c7, and b8 with the target on e5. And that makes it, of course, very logical to attack it with the bishop. And that is the solution. So we saw elimination of defense and luring as preparatory moves. And this one is more complicated. Let's see what is the vulnerable piece. Can you find it? It's the queen on b6. So what are the squares currently that the queen still has as escape squares? Well, we have c5. It's, of course, the queen is looking to c5, but the queen from black would be defended by the bishop on e7. There is a b4, and there's the capture on b2. And if you would say which piece can cover b6, c5, b4 and b2, we would need some kind of unicorn that doesn't exist in chess, so we need cooperation between the pieces. But if we look at the knight does 3 out of 4, right? If the knight can go to a4, it covers c5, b2, and attacks the piece on b6. So that looks like a good start. And now let's have a look again and do the same for a second time. What are the escape squares of the queen? There are the queen doesn't have any escape squares anymore, so we just have to attack it. We bring in the second piece to conclude it, and so this is chasing. So we saw elimination of defense, we saw luring, and this is chasing. Targeting. Targeting is positioning your own attacker with tempo by attacking something, and with trapping it's often used for pawns. And so in this position we see that the queen on e7 is cutting off the retreat of the bishop on f6, and the bishop on f6 currently has no squares, but we don't have a piece to attack it, and we would like to attack it, of course, with something of lesser value than the bishop, because otherwise it's not a favorable exchange. So targeting is positioning our own piece with tempo by playing e4, attacking another target, the knight. The knight moves away, and then after e5 we are trapping the bishop and winning the piece. We go to the fifth one, which is clearing. Let's identify the vulnerable piece in this position. The vulnerable piece is the queen on b5. What are the escape squares of the queen in this position? Well, it's c4 is an escape square, and e2 is an escape square. And if we look to the shape of the escape squares, it becomes clear that the bishop would be good to trap the queen, but our own piece on e4, the knight, is in the way. So we have to clear the line from h7 to b1. So we have to clear this line. So this is the fifth way of preparing a combination. And now the question is, what is the right way to do it? So there are two moves to do it. And that would be, because we want to do this with tempo, right? We don't. So we want to attack something, and we want to do it with tempo. If we would go back with the knight, the queen has freedom to move. So we want to do it with a threatening move. And if we play knight c3, which looks very logical, right? The pawn takes, the bishop comes to d3, and you said, okay, I'm done, I trapped the queen. But here we see that we have to really verify whether we consider the best defense by the opponent. And white has a counterattack, pinning the bishop, and if the bishop takes here, then the rook takes here and white is winning. So knight takes knight c3 with this double attack on the undefended rook on a2 and the queen on b5 and with the threat of bishop d3. Looks like a killer, but white has this surprising rook d1, pinning the attacker and taking all force away of this attacker because there's a queen behind it, and then it's just black takes a queen and white takes a queen, but in the process black already invested a knight on c3. So there is one other move, which is knight g3. And after knight g3, we can see that the knight is actually taking away the square e2. So it's not only attacking the rook on f1, it's also attacking this this knight. Because, right, if so the queen can only go to c4, but then there is still a bishop d3, followed by knight e2 check. So the queen is still lost. So this is a very powerful move, and after h takes g3 we can execute our bishop d3, trapping the queen, and there is no rook d1 to pin that piece. So this was the last one of the 5 preparatory moves. So let's close out with an interesting example. So in this case, we have to identify the vulnerable piece. And this is just an example to show that although the concept is relatively easy, it can take some calculation to get it right. The queen on h4 is vulnerable. So let's identify currently what are the squares that the queen can go to. Well, the bishop on e3 is taking away g5 and h6. The bishop on e2 is taking away g4 and h5, and the pawns are taking away g3 and h3. So it looks rather simple that we just have to attack it. The most obvious way just to attack it is to play g3, but then we have created an escape square by moving this pawn, and now it's no longer obvious how to attack the queen because the knight is defending against bishop g4. The knight on f6 is defending that square, so we cannot bring the bishop. So we have to prepare trapping the queen. And of course, if you look at the queen is on a dark square. So a logical way would be for the bishop on e3, the dark squared bishop of white, to trap the queen. But we need cooperation between the pieces, and that we cannot play bishop g5, it has to be defended. There are 2 moves for the queen to defend the bishop and to prepare bishop g5, which are queen c1 and queen d2. So what is the difference? Can you find a difference? Because one works and the other one doesn't. And this all comes back to the 4th step, finding the best defense by your opponent and a counterattack. So after queen d2, right, if black just kind of ignores the threat by attacking the knight on e5, d6, now black has a surprising e3, attacking the queen. And after the queen takes, black has created an escape square for the queen. So we saw 2 moves, right? We saw g3 fails to creating a new escape square on h3. Queen d2 fails to a counterattack. This intermediate move e3 followed by queen e4, creating a new escape square. So that leaves us with queen c1. Now we have to verify and think like, what can black do? Bishop g5 is threat. So defense, right? PC Mike, protect, capture, move away, interpose, counterattack. The first one would be, can black protect the square g5? Protecting would be the move h6. So now there's no bishop g5 anymore. But what has happened? At the moment that black's plays h6, the square g6 has become available. And now we can attack the queen in a different way with knight g6, and we verify that the queen is completely trapped and no new escape squares, because the knight was not taking away any escape squares of the queen, and the queen is still trapped. So queen c1. What else can black do? Right, it looks like game over. Now have a look at the move knight h5. So this is again a counterattack. So we saw after queen d2 there was the move e3, counterattack. Why is knight h5 a counterattack to begin with? Because it doesn't prevent the move bishop g5. Can you find what black would play and what the idea is behind knight h5? Well, the idea is bishop g5 and knight f4, and if the bishop takes here, knight e2, king goes away, knight takes here, rook takes here, and both sides have an equal amount of minor pieces. So knight h5 is a very surprising but strong response, a counter-attack response, taking advantage of the fact that the bishop on e2 is undefended, and the fact that the queen on c1 and the king on g1 are at a knight's distance. But the knight had a very crucial defending task that we saw when we were evaluating the move g3. And that crucial defending task was that the knight on f6 was defending against bishop g4. So now we can go back to our original line, move the pawn, the queen comes up, and we trap the queen with bishop g4. Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope to see you with future videos. Thank you.